Hi, Maria.
Hi, Craig. Morning. How are you?
Doing fine. Definitely seems like that people need to be invited. Like I needed to click on a thing to like let you in.
Yeah, you're having like a reservation
Yep.
in Zoom, and then I think, yeah.
You have to register to get in. It just helps prevent Zoom bombing.
Mhm.
But there's also a waiting room. So before you got in, I had to click a thing to say that you were allowed in. So I just need to,
Oh, like the sidebar that says like allow.
yeah.
Mhm. If
Um, oh,
yeah, I would suggest like when you start, make someone else a co-host so they can let people in while you're presenting. So you don't have to worry about that, but you can still share your screen because you're like,
oh yeah, I know. Here, I'm gonna make you co-host.
oh, okay. I'm a co-host now.
And just FYI, this is being streamed on YouTube for my family and some of my friends and stuff.
Yeah.
They can actually probably just see you and your face on their big TV right now.
Oh, great. Hi,
Say
everyone.
hi to my family. Here, I'll put my face up too.
Hi.
Hi.
Well, I know your dad already, so at
Yeah,
least,
he's watching.
but it's like 1 hour before the call, right?
Yeah, I can see right now that they're watching.
Oh, hi, Craig's family. Is it snowing up there in Canada still? I saw like 100% of Canada was covered by snow in winters.
All right, now it's May.
Well, I don't know. I've barely seen snow in my life.
Yeah, it's
Hmm.
probably melted by now.
I'm hungry. And do you need anything with like anything else with help?
I just need to make a few changes to my slides before we start, but I think I should probably be good.
Hmm. Right back.
Come in.
How's everything looking?
Good.
Good?
I'm streaming live. My family is watching right now. Maria's in the room, but that's it.
Nice. I'm waiting for you to let me into the Zoom.
You're in.
Are you gonna have to manually let people in?
Yeah. I put Maria as a co-host so that she
perfect.
could add people. Did you want to be one as well?
Yeah, I'm more than happy to.
That'd be great. Thank you. Hey, your face is on it now.
Yeah, I let you in. I was like, I just saw your name pop up, and it's like, hey.
Perfect. Do you need anything else?
No.
Can I take a picture?
Sure.
So you can say, hang on, let me have my phone.
Wait. I need your advice. Jacket off or on? And
Jacket on, and then halfway through the presentation, you take it off.
and then like swing it over my shoulder.
Yeah.
Like everything's no big deal.
Yeah. Yeah, let them decide.
Yeah, jacket on.
Okay. What about glasses? Off. They're glaring.
Yeah, they have the reflection.
Yeah.
But yeah, the jacket, I think like it's because we didn't see the whole strap thing. What do you call that?
My suspenders?
Suspenders.
What's wrong with my
You
suspenders?
see like the shoulders, but we don't see like the whole suspender. So it looked like two black things in your shoulders.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Model yourself for your defense time. Wait, I gotta be the parent here because your parents aren't here to take all the photos.
My parents are watching this right now.
Yeah, I know, exactly. I'm doing it for them. Gotta get all the
Good
photos.
shot.
Okay, I will leave you be.
Okay.
Good luck.
Thanks.
I like the motto that we talked about in the class. Enjoy yourself.
Yeah.
This is only gonna happen once. Enjoy
Yeah.
the ride.
Yeah, a little stressful to make last minute changes, but
I know, but it's done.
yes.
Enjoy the ride.
Yeah. Thanks, Sam.
I'm gonna mute my mic. I'm washing the dishes.
I can hear.
Hi, Mayada, welcome.
Hello.
Hi, thanks for coming.
You're welcome and good luck. It's gonna be great.
Thank you. Hi, Minnie.
Hello!
Thanks for coming.
Of course. I'm gonna patch up my notes from last time.
Your notes on,
Your practice defense.
it's changed quite a bit.
Oh, okay, cool.
Well, somewhat. Constance wanted me to cut down a lot of it.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I look forward to either way.
How are you doing, Mimi? And Mayada? I feel like, I don't know, get to talk to people, see how they're doing.
I am the most unproductive in the world. And, yeah.
Just an FYI, this is being streamed to YouTube, and my family and friends and stuff are watching.
Oh, like right now?
Yep.
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you for asking.
Just to warn you.
Hi, Sarah. Oh, she's connecting. Okay. Yeah, but I think it's normal to be unproductive right now.
I'm unproductive. I'm working hard and very diligently. It's a very tough time and we're transitioning.
Hey, Sarah.
Yeah. Hey.
Hey!
Ooh, like your hair in the picture's like purple? Is it the same pink hair or is it purple?
You all have pretty pictures.
This cover day you can put like a picture somehow, but I don't know how to do it. So this is just my virtual background. Just close the camera.
Suppose I'll open my camera so that people see my face.
Yeah. Oh, Craig, did you put Brody? Like, did you put the bow tie on Brody today?
No,
No.
he's not here. I'm at Sam's place.
Yeah. But still, like, formal at a distance.
True. Oh, Sarah's gone.
Sure. How is this stream on YouTube? Do you see like everyone or do you see just like the speaker?
You actually see, because nobody else had video running except you had your background, all they could see is your background.
But wait.
But they can hear. So it shows the video of whoever has their video on, which is now me and you. But before I turned my video on, it was just your background.
Oh, okay. Oh no. Okay.
It's fine.
Amanda.
Amanda!
Hey.
Hi, good morning.
Hello!
Good morning.
Just a disclaimer, this is being streamed to YouTube for my friends and family and being recorded.
Elizabeth. Yeah, I think it's good to repeat it like just before starting.
Mm-hmm. I will, but since people are just sort of talking right now, I just wanted to let everyone know.
Wait, Elizabeth has just said this picture? Let me see. Oh,
Not gonna lie, that tripped me up. I was like, I didn't know Gisette's like real name was Elizabeth.
yeah, I was like, this is not just it. Elizabeth.
Hey y'all.
Hello!
Hey.
Thanks for coming.
Problem. I'm so excited. I was like captivated ever since we had that series for during the fall quarter when you presented, and I was like, oh my goodness, I have to know how it ends.
Oh, it doesn't. Really. Hey, Gary.
Gary,
Hello.
So Gary,
it's a Gary.
How is everyone?
good. How are you? Good.
Lovely.
Oh, Kurt's here.
Kurt.
Kurt.
Hi, Kurt.
Hey, Kurt.
Yay.
You look substantially better dressed than I do.
Hi, Katie.
Guys, how's everybody?
Great. Let me go grab some headphones real quick.
Mike Tissenbaum is joining?
Yeah.
I would admit. Okay.
He's a very good friend of mine.
Oh, okay. I was like, I don't know this person. I hope it's not a bomb.
Hey, Mike and Kat.
How's it going?
Good. How are you guys?
Good. Yeah. Hey, Kurt.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. Yeah. Just had to get out of another meeting because we live on Zoom now.
We do.
So, yeah.
And just FYI for the people that just came in, this is being live streamed to YouTube, just so some other friends and family can watch as well.
Cool.
So I think we're just waiting on Constance to start proper. And as chair, I'm sure she'll say a few words or something before we get going.
Yep, I'll let him know.
Jason.
Jason.
I guess Maria
Jason?
and Minnie are announcing
friend.
everybody that comes into the room.
Yes.
Of course.
Jason.
I mean, it's like the live version of hi. Well, the virtual version of hi, how are you?
Mm.
And Constance.
Constance.
Yes.
Constance.
Constance.
Hey, Constance.
You're in mute.
Thank you. So welcome to your defense. I'm going to, Craig, you may want to give me hosting privileges because we only have 1 hour to do this, actually 57 minutes now. If everyone can please stay muted so that, Craig, I'm going to ask you to keep your discussion short since your committee's here and has read your thesis. And then I really want to get us straight into Q&A, which is the defense part. For those of you who have never attended a dissertation defense, this is highly unusual to be doing it virtually, but not impossible. The committee, but this is not a standard presentation. This is a defense of a thesis. So the committee is expected to have read closely your work. And I want to spend our time drilling into details and Q&A. And some of those questions are intended really to help you display to us that you have mastered research methods and have mastered this literature so that we know that you're ready to pass. Are there any questions before we begin, especially from the other committee members? Anything I haven't covered or? Okay, I'm going to take the silence as that sounds just fine. So Craig, why don't you start by doing sharing your screen and doing just a quick overview to remind us of the structure of your thesis. And then we'll shift to Q&A. I think, is 15 minutes enough time for you?
Yeah, I think I can get through it in that time.
Great. If in doubt, I would actually, if it's okay from the committee, Craig, Katie, I'm looking at you. If it's okay, I'd like to sort of really skip over some of the preliminary work, the literature review that we actually already talked about in depth during your comps. So maybe if you just want to highlight that and move on toward the actual nuts and bolts of this study.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Great. By the way, I love your suit.
Thank you. It's my best one. I wear it like for every major presentation.
Good, it's fabulous. And I just want to say, I mean, it's really exciting to get to dissertation defense level. So even though we're on Zoom, I hope you understand that this is really exciting. I'm very happy for you. Expect this to be a good grilling, but it should be exciting because you have all of these folks that are here only to talk about your work. So right now we're going to kick the tires on it and stuff, but that's exactly what we should do. It's a defense.
Yeah, sounds great.
And now I'll stop talking.
Okay, well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming to my defense, or as Constance mentioned, given the state of the world right now, thank you for not actually coming to my defense. And just a quick reminder for everyone, this will be streamed to YouTube for some of my friends and family to watch, just as a disclaimer. So we're going to very quickly go over some of the literature on which this dissertation is based. Starting briefly with how failure is conceptualized in play and game research literature. We'll dip into how the psychology literature can inform how we think about how people react to failure. This will illuminate the gaps in the research that this dissertation is aiming to fill and lead to the study that I conducted to investigate them. We'll jump into the results from there, and as Constance mentioned, spend most of our time dissecting them. By the end, we'll consider the implications, limitations, and directions for future research. So failure is a common outcome when playing a game. Although it comes in many forms, it can look like this, it can look like this, it can look like this, or countless other ways. I'm sure every single one of you has some other examples of a different way to fail in a video game that you're just itching to contribute right now. Because of its commonplace nature, failure has a very special relationship in video games. In his book, The Art of Failure, Jesper Juhl argues that games create a paradox in the way that we typically avoid, or in that we typically avoid failure, but in games we actually desire it. In fact, he found that players of an action video game who completed it but didn't fail at all actually report lower engagement. And game developers have used tools to ensure players are met with an appropriate level of challenge for decades. This can be done as simply having a player select the level of difficulty that they start the game at. And some games even have the option to turn the difficulty down at any point if the player is stuck. However, having this option might actually lower player persistence as they have an easy and tempting way out of a challenging part of the game. Although that is probably a research project for another day. Other games have feedback mechanism to the player's ability. While in last place in the Mario Kart series, you're more likely to get powerful items that help you or that help propel you to higher ranks. While if you're in first place, you're more likely to get less powerful items, making the game relatively harder for the more skillful. Some developers have created systems that covertly adjust the difficulty of the game in the code as well. These changes can be as small as adjusting the chance a player will get hit or the amount of damage that they take. Coined as difficulty adjustment systems by Haneke, these systems change how difficult the game is when the player is struggling to ensure they don't get too frustrated. And this can also be used to ensure that the player doesn't get too bored as well. And while these systems ensure the player is kept an appropriate level of difficulty when it comes to the goals of the game, sometimes that's not what the player is aiming to do. It's important to note that the perspective we most often take on failure in games is through the hard-coded fail states, which are the goals that the developers put into the game that trigger progression. However, the goals that the player has isn't always as clear as this. For instance, players can aim to progress through the game as quickly as they can. They can aim to compete against other players, or sometimes they aim to just make meaningful connections with other people. And each of these playstyles comes with a different way to fail. So from this, we can see that failure is a very complex part of the play experience, but yet it's been very understudied. From here, to get a little more perspective on it, let's turn to the literature on psychology for some insights on how individuals react to failure. There are many cognitive constructs that involve failure in some way, but the most direct measure of how an individual reacts to failure is mastery orientation. Individuals with a mastery orientation typically repeat a task after failing, have heightened affect when approaching a difficult problem, and show increased effort in the face of challenge. These individuals are invigorated when they fail. They relish at a challenge and take failure as information on how to improve. On the other end of the spectrum are individuals with a helpless orientation. When these individuals are confronted with failure, they're more likely to give up. They report negative affects such as boredom, aversion, and anxiety. And their strategy use deteriorates and their ineffectual responses increase. Helpless-oriented individuals will shut down in the face of failure, putting little to no effort in, or just quitting altogether. And interestingly, these individuals don't look any different from mastery-oriented individuals when they succeed. It's only their reaction to failure that makes them any different. So these constructs are typically measured through either survey, role play activities, or discourse analysis. And I found that each of these only captures a snapshot of how the individual perceives their ability to persist through failure. And it often ends up categorizing them as either helpless-oriented or mastery-oriented, assuming that they'll either always give up or always persist, respectively. However, this doesn't allow for an understanding of how long an individual persists through failure. These literature in failure in games and the psychology of how individuals react to failure highlights multiple important gaps. So while failure has been seen as an important part of the play experience, there are many nuances in how players react to failure in games that remain underexplored. Further, the literature in psychology conceptualizes how individuals react to failure, but does not account for the behaviors an individual takes in response, and also doesn't account for how long an individual persists through failure. Some of my preliminary work shows that individuals who regard challenge as an important part of the game experience actually score higher on these mastery orientation surveys, suggesting that people who score higher on these scales are more inclined to challenge in games. So to address these gaps, I conducted a study investigating how individuals react to notoriously challenging game Cuphead. Cuphead is a run and gun style platform shooter game made by Studio MDHR, and it's acclaimed for its very challenging levels and unique hand-drawn art style. For most levels, the participant is pitted against a boss enemy immediately when beginning the level and must figure out how to dodge their attacks while dealing enough damage to try to take them down. The player usually can be hit 3 times before they have to start the level over. Participants of my study played Cuphead for 2 weeks in their own playtime and in their own preferred play space, meaning they took the game home and played it wherever they wanted. This was done to ensure their gameplay was as natural as possible, and they were actually advised to play Cuphead as if they bought it themselves and were just playing their own free time. Through this study, I aim to answer the following research question. Oh, my clicker's not working. So the main research question I aimed to answer was, what is the relationship between mastery orientation and mastery-oriented behaviors in Cuphead. And I further broke this down into 5 sub-questions. Do individuals who score higher on the mastery orientation survey perform more mastery-oriented behaviors in Cuphead? Do mastery-oriented individuals perform more mastery-oriented behaviors before performing helpless-oriented behaviors in Cuphead, i.e. do they persist for longer? What level features encourage players to persist through failure in Cuphead the most? Does mastery orientation score increase with more game or failure exposure? And what demographic differences appear in mastery-oriented behaviors in Cuphead or mastery scores? The data I collected to answer these questions included demographic data, coded gameplay, pre and post mastery orientation surveys, and player interviews on their opinions about failure in Cuphead. So before and after playing Cuphead, participants were asked to fill out 2 surveys on mastery orientation. We won't go through all these questions, but they were taken from the mastery section of the family and work orientation questionnaire, which aimed at measuring how willing an individual is to persist through challenging activities. Mastery orientation has also been shown to be context dependent, so questions were also modified for a game context in the following ways. So i.e. the first question, I would rather do something at which I feel confident and relaxed than something that is challenging and difficult. For a game context was changed to, I would rather play a game at which I feel confident and relaxed than a game that is challenging and difficult. These scores were summed to create a mastery score from a 5-point Likert scale from strongly disagree to strongly agree, midpoint being neither agree nor disagree. And those of you reading closely will notice questions 1 and 3 were reverse scored. A score of 24 was considered neutral, higher was considered more mastery oriented, and lower was considered more helpless oriented. Participants handed in recordings of their gameplay, which were coded for moments of failure, as well as mastery and helpless oriented behaviors. Codes were generated from game states denoting hard-coded fail states in Cuphead, being any time that they got hit or took damage. Behaviors that we would expect from mastery-oriented individuals, such as retrying a level and adapting their behavior to failure. These adaptations were only coded in response to failure. For example, if a player got hit by a projectile and then changed their behaviors the next time that they encountered that projectile, it was coded as an adaptation based on that failure. Next, behaviors we would expect from helpless-oriented individuals, such as quitting or strategy deteriorations. These deteriorations were defined as when a player seemingly took an action purposely to lose or give up. For example, jumping into a pit or jumping in front of a projectile. And finally, level markers, including when a player started a level, when they completed a phase, and when they completed that level. After playing for 1 week, participants came into the lab for an interview on their experiences with Cuphead so far and their opinions on failure in the game. Questions included, do you typically enjoy challenging games? Is Cuphead as hard as you thought it was going to be? What do you consider failure in Cuphead? These are just some of the questions asked during this interview, which included follow-up questions as well. And these were used to gain a sense of the participants' thoughts on failure in Cuphead and to inform further research. Participants came back for another interview after playing Cuphead for 2 weeks. This was conducted as a data-driven retrospective interview in which participants watched clips from their gameplay and were asked about behaviors that were coded with either an adaptation or a deterioration. This was done to confirm or correct those coded behaviors to make sure that they were in fact changes in behavior motivated by failure as observed. If it was found that the participant had other motivations for the change in behavior, the code was removed or corrected and further coding for that participant was informed. So in sum, participants conducted mastery-oriented surveys for general and game contexts, and then played Cuphead for 1 week, after which they were interviewed on their experiences around failure and then played Cuphead for 1 more week. They were interviewed again to confirm that the changes in behavior were coded properly. And finally, they completed another mastery orientation survey for general and game contexts. This resulted in demographic data, pre-post mastery scores, coded gameplay behaviors, and interviews on player opinions on failure. So I recruited 60 participants through departmental listservs, as well as during class announcements during a game-based undergraduate course. Of these 60, 23 identified as female, 37 identified as male, and no participants identified anywhere else on the gender spectrum. The average age was 20. Participants averaged 20 hours per week playing video games and averaged 11 years playing video games. And these hours per week and number of years playing were combined to create a game experience score, which was taken as a general measure of their experience with games rather than a number of hours accumulated.
Craig, I'm just going to do a time check. We're now 20 minutes in. So if we can take it like 5 more minutes so we can get ourselves to the defense part.
Sure.
Sorry to rush you.
No problem. I'm just about to jump into the results here. So we can skip over the amount of data here that we collected. Before I jump into the results, are there any questions that I can address about the study setup?
I have none.
None here.
Okay, let's jump in then. So to investigate the first sub-question, which was, do individuals who score higher on mastery orientation survey perform more mastery-oriented behaviors? I conducted linear regressions between mastery scores and mastery behaviors. Before I jump into them, I'll mention that most of my variables were log transformed to achieve normality. So the scales for most of my graphs may be a little unintuitive. So I found that general mastery scores were positively associated with the ratio of mastery to helpless oriented behaviors, showing that those who performed more mastery behaviors in game compared to helpless mastery or helpless behaviors scored higher on that mastery survey. I also found that pre-game mastery scores are positively associated with total number of mastery behaviors when we consider how long an individual will persist through failure through the average number of mastery behaviors before a helpless behavior. So this graph is a little confusing. It's showing the multivariate linear regression that I ran with the color of the trend lines indicating average number of mastery behaviors before a helpless behavior, i.e. how long someone will persist. And as you can see, as the trend lines get lighter, they go up on the y-axis, showing that as game mastery score increases, so does average mastery-oriented behaviors until a helpless-oriented behavior. So the higher they score on the survey, the longer they persist before showing signs of giving up. As well, because of the trend lines are all sloped upwards, this shows that the total number of mastery behaviors, or as the total number of mastery behaviors increase, so does the game mastery score as well. So this graph is showing total number of mastery behaviors increasing, as well as number of mastery behaviors before showing signs of helpless behavior increasing. Both increase as someone scores higher on a mastery orientation survey for game contexts. I also found that pre-game mastery scores were negatively associated with number of times a level is abandoned before completing it. And this shows that players who score higher on this mastery orientation survey also show fewer helpless oriented behaviors. So considering my second sub-question, do mastery-oriented individuals perform more mastery-oriented behaviors before performing helpless-oriented behaviors in Cuphead? We can refer back to that previous graph showing the multivariate relationship between mastery orientation scores and mastery-oriented behaviors. So again, the same graph shows the game mastery orientation scores are positively associated with mastery behaviors made sequentially. So how long someone will persist before showing signs of giving up was positively associated with how high they scored on the game mastery orientation survey. The third sub-question, what level features encourage players to persist through failure in Cuphead the most? I looked at behavior frequencies between phases and levels. Of the patterns that emerged of interest were the first level that that was presented that had a steep increase in difficulty. This level shows the highest number of level restarts, which was defined as when a player hit restart from the middle or from the pause menu before losing all their lives. So they basically reset the level in the middle of playing it in this level more than any other. This level also had the highest number of mastery-oriented behaviors in the first phase, but then one of the highest number of helpless behaviors on the second and third phase. So this suggests that this level or other levels that increase the difficulty at a higher rate than other parts of the game elicit very different responses and end up having people persist a lot at the beginning, but have harder time persisting when they get to harder parts of that level. Do you have a question, Constance? No, moving on. Another interesting pattern that I observed was the highest number of mastery oriented behaviors before a helpless oriented behavior occurs later in the game. This suggests that the further a player gets into the game, the more that they're willing to persist through failure. Although this could be due to the time and effort investment that the players made to get to that point. However, there are other alternative explanations, i.e. people who are more persistent could make it to the further in the game where others couldn't. So more investigation is needed on this. To answer the sub-question, does master orientation score increase with more game or failure exposure? I conducted paired t-tests between pre and post mastery scores. I found that game mastery did not significantly change. However, visualization shows that scores did level out somewhat. We'll get to that in a second. General mastery scores did drop after playing 2 weeks. However, since game mastery scores didn't change, it's likely that this drop is due to other factors outside of the game. For instance, many participants mentioned that midterm exams were a factor influencing how much they ended up playing, and this could have influenced participants' general mastery scores while unaffecting their game mastery scores. So visualizing the change in mastery score, individuals who scored higher on the mastery orientation scale tended to lower towards the average, while individuals who started lower tended to increase towards the average. So it's tough to see on this graph, but the peaks here are a little more red, indicating a drop towards the average, while the valleys a little more green, which indicates an increase towards the average as well. And this is kind of just to foreshadow, this is seen in some of the demographic analyses as well. So to answer the sub-question, what demographic differences appear in mastery-oriented orientation or mastery-oriented behaviors in Cuphead or mastery score? I again conducted t-tests of mastery behaviors and survey scores between men and women. Post hoc power analyses showed that my power level was lower than required for some of these analyses. So I followed up with permutation t-tests to check the effects. So initially, I found no differences in mastery behaviors or pre to post mastery scores between men and women. They didn't score any differently from my analyses. However, game mastery or women's game mastery scores significantly increased after playing for 2 weeks, while men's game mastery scores significantly decreased. And again, visualization shows that this is a leveling out effect, where some women came into the study on the lower end of the range and increased towards the average. Some men came into the study on the higher end of the range and decreased towards the average.
I'm going to ask a question here while we're on it.
Sure.
How do you know that this isn't just regression to the mean?
If it were just straight regression to the mean across the board, I would expect, I wouldn't expect women especially to significantly increase. I would expect everyone across the board. So the fact that women increase while men decreased shows that it may be sort of a regression towards the mean, but that was a gendered effect.
Thank you. You can continue.
So together, these sub-questions help answer the main research question of the dissertation: what is the relationship between mastery orientation and mastery-oriented behaviors in Cuphead? So we found that participants who score higher on mastery orientation survey show more mastery-oriented behaviors in game overall and sequentially, and are less likely to abandon a level before completing it. After playing Cuphead for 2 weeks, general mastery scores decreased overall, although some game mastery scores did not change, suggesting that is probably outside influence. And visualization of game mastery scores show an evening out of scores. This was seen especially between men who began the study overconfident in their ability to persist through failure, and women who started the underconfident, suggesting playing Cuphead for 2 weeks equalized men and women's perspective of their ability to persist through failure in this challenging game. Mastery behaviors in levels show player persistence increasing when in later phases and levels, suggesting that the more invested a player is, the more likely they are to keep trying. But again, further investigation into this result is warranted, as there is a couple of other explanations for it. Further, levels with a steep increase in difficulty elicit very different behaviors from player than the typical levels of Cuphead. So this research illuminates a couple new intricacies in how players react to failure in games. Through this methodology, player behaviors can be categorized by mastery-oriented behaviors, which can allow researchers and developers to better understand how players are behaving in games. The study also furthers the psychology literature of how an individual reacts to failure by introducing a behavior-based measure. This allows researchers to begin to view the actual behaviors an individual takes after failure. And this could lead to a better understanding of the constructs used by psychology researchers to understand how individuals react to failure across contexts. This begins to show what mechanics and level features are more likely to encourage players to persist or give up. Further investigation into these gameplay behaviors could help direct developers to create more engaging games that encourage players to keep playing through challenging game content. This also shows how long an individual persists through failure is an important part of mastery orientation, which previously isn't captured. This could point towards a reconceptualization of how we understand mastery orientation, suggesting that persistence is more of a resource that runs out as an individual persists, rather than a trait that an individual simply has. And we're well over time, so should I go into some of the limitations and future research here quickly, or did you want to pause here, Constance?
Yeah, give 1 more minute for limitations, future directions, then we'll transition. Okay,
so very quickly, a few limitations are important to keep in mind here. Participants were recruited for this study through UCI. They were all undergraduates. This could suggest that they came into the study with similar levels of mastery orientation, as they all achieved admission to a large university. This does not necessarily say, though, that those who attend an undergraduate program are less mastery oriented. It may actually be the case that less privileged individuals are actually more accustomed to persisting through hardship. However, the nuances of this are not addressed in this study. Further, participants identified only as male and female, and this could be leaving out significant demographics who might experience very differently. The age ranges captured here don't include children or young adults, or rather do only include young adults. Older individuals as well might show different results. It's also important to keep in mind that Cuphead is known for how difficult it is. This likely attracted individuals who are more likely to persist through challenging games. So changing the game might change the results here as well. So the narrative elements of an RPG might elicit different responses to failure. And finally, some participants, since participants were recruited to the study knowing the game was challenging, they may have had different expectations that changed their behaviors. As such, player expectations into how much they're going to fail might play an important role that is also not captured here. And these limitations also give some good direction on how future research might be conducted. So expanding this methodology to other games and genres could show nuances between these games or the mechanics in them that influence how players react to failure. While Cuphead can be played with multiple people, team games might elicit very different responses. Games played as esports have a range of factors that might influence players. For instance, having an audience or a coach might change how players react to failure. As well, player expectations of failure might have a major influence. An interesting study would be to tell players that a game is going to be really easy, but then is actually quite difficult. And finally, the player or the goals that the player are taking in the game might have a strong influence on their reactions to failure as well. And research into this avenue is also very warranted. So just to sum up, this research begins what might be a very long line of investigation into the nuances of how players react to failure in one of our most pervasive media. Thank you very much.
Good. I want to open it up to the committee for now questions.
Sorry, I'm actually not muted, so I've been struggling. Craig, thanks so much for the presentation. It's been amazing to see just sort of this work develop, and I really really everything I read. I just have some questions about I just want to know a little more about. So one was the framework on page 121, where let me just pull it up here. Oops. I'll give you a chance to get there too.
Yeah, thank you.
Oops. Sorry, my scrolling is. Let's see, what did you call it?
You can search for menial.
Yeah, it's in section 4.4.1 under the role of failure in video games.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you present a framework here that talks about 6 levels of distinct difficulty. I just wondered where it came from, because it was sort of it just kind of appeared. And so I didn't understand, was this something that you had developed based on the research? Was it a kind of speculative framework? So I just wanted to know a little bit more about, about this. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. It was much more a speculative approach that as I was going through the discussion and reflecting on the results and the intricacies that had started to pop out here, that I kind of wanted to get down as part of the discussion of where this work could start to lead. I realized that it could have been framed a little bit more speculative than I did in the actual dissertation.
Yeah, for me, it just sort of appeared. And so what I didn't understand really is, again, how it related back to the research, as well as, yeah, sort of what it was pointing to, right? There is a sentence that says this can be used to better design sort of difficulty and levels and that kind of thing. That was one question. So I think going forward, if you were to, develop this further into a kind of book, I think there would have to be a lot more work done on this particular framework.
Yeah.
And then so this is just a big wondering I had as I was going through, particularly the latter part around the role of failure in games. So the next section, 4.4.2. So you say, by investigating when and why an individual begins to show helpless-oriented behaviors, developers can better understand how failure is best framed in games and when players are most likely to quit playing. So I wondered if you had looked into the kinds of data that developers commonly pull on their players as they're developing games. Because what struck me is that actually developers are incredibly incentivized to understand why players are like getting stuck, stop quitting. I mean, it is the thing that as a designer, that's the kind of the main thing you're focused on.
Yeah.
Through the iterative process. And so they pull all kinds of data there. the way they frame playtesting. So I just wondered if you'd looked at like from a the paper suggested a little bit that this wasn't something developers were paying attention to. I don't know if you meant to suggest that, but it sort of felt like, oh, developers could pay attention to this, when in fact, it is one of the main things so I just wondered if you had looked into any of the kinds of user research, games user research stuff, the kinds of data. Yeah.
I definitely didn't mean it for it to seem like our developers don't find this to be an important part of creating a game. Like I absolutely agree that I found that it is incredibly important and like really is focused on the hangups that I found are finding that clear-cut research from developers showing exactly how they're approaching it and sort of a more unified way to understand it. I've in my literature review, like I found that it's almost the intricacies were more of like trade secret. It's more they understand how to do it, and it's considered a very important part of how to develop a game, but there is no research-based measurement of it and dissection of it, which I think would be telling a lot of developers what they already know is important to put into games and an approach to come into games, but would help further that discussion by conceptualizing a little better and sort of defining it a little bit better.
Yeah, I guess what I would say is I think you're on the right track around trade secret. Like it's shared widely among developers themselves, right? Mm-hmm. They understand it, but they're not writing research papers necessarily. Mm-hmm. My guess is they're not trying to look at individual players necessarily to say, is there something about this particular player that is causing them to persist or not persist, to leave? So that's, I think, the unique contribution that your work is making, is that developers potentially could understand something more about their player base, right, around mm-hmm. these kinds of orientations. And if they knew something more about individual players and then the population of players around this mastery orientation, maybe it would help them design their games in different ways. So I think in the dissertation, I wanted to see a little bit more of that conversation.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I also think that like studies, sitting down with these developers and getting their perspective and sort of gluing that all together and seeing what the common approaches are, and if they kind of inform this research or if this research informs their approach, I think would be really beneficial.
Thanks.
Just I'm keeping notes on commentary so you don't have to, Craig.
Thank you very much. The whole thing is being recorded as well.
Good. Craig, do you have questions, or Katie, do you have others? I don't want to.
I'm going to let other people. I'm going to let other people ask. Yeah.
Kurt, do you want to?
So, Craig, one thing that really struck me about the phenomena that Constance was talking about in terms of potential reversion to the mean with the gender differences is just how much we've seen there seem to be similar things popping up across other studies, whether it be some of the things that people have seen in education and learning games, like differential improvements for females, or even some of the computer science stuff where men overestimating their competence in that. There's no real suggestion there, other than I think this feels like it's a drop, not a drop in the bucket. It's a pebble on the scale of there being a thing there. When you get enough studies on one side, you start to say, okay, I think we may be looking at phenomena. And this feels like this is a contribution in that respect. Mm-hmm. The one thing I wanted to really ask you about was just to go through, maybe just, I don't know what way to do this is, but I really enjoyed the, in chapter 4, the tables and figures, and I felt like there really is a lot here. I feel like doing this kind of study, buys you a type of oh, I don't know, a type of just access to a type of data that we just don't normally get for a game like this. But unless I missed something, I didn't quite. I mean, I felt like there were some relatively petite findings, but I didn't get a sense of kind of some larger takeaways. Can you walk through kind of again what you think some of the major findings from those portions were, or maybe some places where you might look in the future, or you
Sure.
would
And
direct future people to look?
Are you talking specifically about the frequency tables?
Yeah.
Okay. So just to frame that for everyone else watching, these were behavior frequency tables per phase and level for some of the different mastery behaviors and how long people persist, broken down into each level and phase. So I think the one that I talked about in the presentation here, and I think that jumps out at me the most, was the table 4.41 here, average or frequency of average master oriented behaviors before a helpless behavior per level. Yeah. You can kind of see like the red numbers here are the where people basically persisted the least before showing signs of giving up, whereas the lighter colors start to show, they show more mastery behaviors before they show any helpless behavior. And that starts to happen later in the game. So this is what led me to interpret this for one interpretation. Again, I want to caveat this with, there are other explanations here that I can't speculate on with this data, but one of the interpretations is that the further they get into this game, the more they persist before they show any signs of giving up. And I think this could show that when they start the game, they are more likely to be playing as if it is sort of an average difficulty of a game. But when they start to get into it and realize what it takes to beat a level in Cuphead, they get used to the fact that they're gonna need to persist. They're gonna need to go through a lot of tries before they complete a level. And from this data, I think this is what this frequency table is showing, that the further they're getting in, the further into the game they get, and the further into each phase of a level that they get, they're showing that they're willing to persist longer before they show signs of giving up.
Yeah, you know what this also reminded me of? Yeah, that makes sense. And there was a spot in here where I'd written, I noted, it felt like you could almost feel people getting pulled in toward becoming Cuphead players, to the point where pre-existing differences or other things started to fall away. It's almost like you're starting to see what you're describing as like measurement of the Cuphead playing experience, if that makes sense, as opposed to say pre-existing behaviors or skills or attitudes or underlying dispositions. And it reminded me in some ways of the stuff that the kind of work that ecological psychologists do, you know, where they will argue oftentimes that if you look at human behavior, say like you and I walking around in the store or whatever, I guess it probably popped in my mind because of the virus, because it's not something we can do right now. But that your behavior is much more governed by the context in the activity than it is by anything else. Like they will say by orders of magnitude, like people acting, doing a thing look a lot like that activity as opposed to their underlying traits and abilities, if that makes sense. And this, I felt like in a weird way, you could kind of see that happening, where it's like, oh, over time, they're all kind of learning to become Cuphead players, which I'm not exactly sure where to go with that, but that was kind of one of my big takeaways from it.
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting things about learning to do that is there were definitely some participants who didn't. There were some participants who kind of got stuck and kept giving up. And when they would get frustrated because they were putting in a lot of attempts into one level but weren't getting anywhere, they would switch to another level, and then they'd kind of have to start over. So there's lots more research to be done simply in what are the different models in how people come to understand that you have to persist through this. Like there's no getting around it. You're just going to have to get into that mindset of, I'm going to have to keep doing this until I get it, where some people catch on and some people didn't.
I'm going to interrupt here. Katie, Kurt, do you guys have an extra 10 minutes after this? We're down to 11 minutes left, and I'm worried about making sure that we've actually asked all of our questions and having a chance to deliberate. Is it a hard stop at 11:30? I don't want to go much further, but I'm concerned about time.
I can do it. I'm going to just slack someone and move a meeting.
Kurt?
I'm okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Before I dive in with questions, did you have any other questions, Kurt?
No.
Okay, I've got some methodological questions. I am concerned about time, so if we can just speed it up, I guess.
Okay.
Oh, some of them were detailed. Like, for example, why did you adjust your data to a normal distribution? And in your main figures, the very first set, what is density in your figures?
The very first set of figures in the presentation?
In the findings.
Were they the ones in the presentation here or in the dissertation?
Dissertation.
I
just want to make sure I understand.
Yes, so the density plots that you're referring to here were showing that a lot of the data, the first one here was bimodal.
Mm-hmm.
This was game mastery or the post-game mastery scores. A lot of the behavioral data in Cuphead was quite skewed. So the mean was further back, where there are some participants who ended up showing more mastery-oriented behaviors in this case, as well as.
So I'm just trying to understand your methodology. So here, these variables were found to be non-normal. So you did log transformations, right? To take the skewed data and turn them into a normal distribution, right?
Yeah.
So when we get down to these graphs, can you just tell me what this, what does the skewed nature of the data mean?
Sure. So the first, the table 3.2, the Shapiro-Wilk normality tests were to show that a lot of this data was not normally distributed. And then the graphs are to show in what way they're not normally distributed. So
Gotcha.
as I mentioned, the first, it shows that it's bimodal. That one I didn't have to change because bimodal distribution was within the assumptions for my analyses. But the skewed data wasn't. So
okay, thank you.
Yeah, so those graphs showing that it's highly skewed needed to be log transformed in most cases.
So on the discussion that Kurt was raising earlier around, and your analysis of when in the game players seem to persist in the face of challenge, essentially, I would strongly encourage you to connect that to some of Drew Davidson's work, that nice diagram he did of investment versus engagement. And when it is that a player falls off of necessarily being engaged and falls into a pattern of investment of trying to, it's okay, one guy, falling into a pattern of wanting to finish the game, right? It might help make sense of those data. I don't think it's a piece that's missing here. I just think it would actually be a really nice paper to think about for next steps of research.
Okay.
The other two questions I had that I think are important, I have some basic suggestions about editing the text, but given our time, I'm just going to focus on what I think are more important issues. So one is, I noticed in all of your work and your variables, you use it to predict mastery orientation, game or general, on the pre-measure, which is counterintuitive, right? Because you wouldn't, so why use the pre-measure versus the post-measure?
So I actually did use the pre and the post measure.
Oh, you did, okay.
Yeah, for a lot of the cases, for a lot of the cases, the pre-measure was the one that was significantly different, but post wasn't.
Hey,
And
that's bizarre. And can you help me? Like, how are you thinking about that? Just because temporal sequence matters, right? So,
right. So
and remind me, there were no differences from pre to post, even when you disaggregated and looked at subgroups, right? So pre and post, I mean, which you wouldn't really expect. You wouldn't expect 2 weeks of gameplay to necessarily shift someone's mastery orientation, right? Like that, I don't feel like that's a non-finding. I feel like that makes logical sense to me. It's a short treatment. But how are you thinking about if it's significant in predicting the pre-measure, how are you thinking about that when it's not significant to the post?
So what I'm relying on is that leveling effect that we ended up seeing, that people tended towards the mean, that for the most part, the people who came into the study overconfident in their mastery scores or ability to persist through mastery or failure ended up coming down towards the mean, and those came up towards the mean from the bottom. So I think,
so you've got more variation on the pre-measure than the post-measure. So that might be one reason why. I know you have low power, so it might be one reason why you're able to get. What were the results like for post? Do you remember? Was it close to significant, or was it just like not at all?
I think for a lot of them, they were not like super close to significant. Like this one just pulling up here, which was mastery range behaviors, and the mastery surveys. The post general was p-value is 0.97 and 0.74 for game mastery orientation.
The other question I had was about your interviews. Your interviews don't appear until the till your interpretation of findings, and I think first you need to have some of that in your methodology up earlier. I guess, I mean, in this piece, I'm not sure how much you need those interviews, how much you want to fold them in or not. But if they're going to be in there, you don't want to, you shouldn't introduce, I don't want to find out about how you did them in the implication section or in the interpretation section. But that's easily fixed. I mean, I guess my other question is, and again, I don't think that this is something that you have to do for this thesis, but I'm curious about whether or not, given where this work seems to be heading, and you have acknowledged at multiple points that failure, because players set their own goals, it means that they're defining their own sense of failure, and you do a really nice job of treating that in a sophisticated way, right? But I wonder if you couldn't think about groups in your data of types of ways that they defined failure, and instead of pegging it on the a priori definitions that you came up with, which I think are good ones, I wonder if you've thought about trying to break them into groups based on how they define failure, and then kind of doing this kind of study again. You could do it with the same data if you can break into groups that are big enough, or I don't even know how to think about that. You'd have some small groups, but I wonder if you've thought about sort of analyzing your data from the perspective of the player's own definition of failure instead of the one you logically defined.
Yeah, absolutely. And I started with the hard-coded fail states because those were the questions that we came in to this with. But in those first interviews, I got a wide range of answers to what is failure in Cuphead, and have actually published those results for FDG this year. And I'm absolutely really excited to dig more into this data. I think this data can go a lot further than it did for just this dissertation or for this thesis, into things like that, grouping people by their own definitions of failure and seeing how those people are different as well. So that's definitely on my radar, and I just think it was outside the scope of this thesis.
Okay, thank you. Other committee questions?
Not for me.
Not for me.
Okay. Seeing as I've never done a defense on Zoom, I think probably I just need to boot everyone. And Craig, is there a way for you to exit into a waiting room? The committee needs to be able to deliberate without others here.
He could create, or you could create a breakout room of just the 4 of you, and you could go in there,
Okay.
deliberate, and he can stay in the lobby, and then you can leave the breakout room when you're done. That's probably the best. That's how I've seen these work. So
I think it's the way to go.
That
Yeah.
sounds lovely.
So you may have to give control back to Craig, and then Craig can make the breakout room so that you all get stuck in it and he doesn't have to go in.
Yeah. Craig, you're still the host, so you want to do that for us?
Yes. As soon as I figure out how.
I know.
And there should be a little set of like squares in the menu, and you just pick and just choose one group.
Yeah.
And then just put your committee in it, and everyone else can leave. We can all leave.
It's nice to see you, Mike.
You too, Constance. Yeah, got to find.
Hi. Hello, both of you. That's great.
Okay, so I've got a room. And now I'm assigning.
Oh, Sam also raises the sage issue that is not something we want going live to YouTube. We need to be able to have a private conversation.
I can stop the YouTube.
Yeah, and I think also that the breakout room generally doesn't count. It's just the main room, but just in case you can kill the cat.
On that topic, I would also say before you submit this to YouTube, can we? I've never ever seen that done in my life, and I'm uncomfortable with it. So I want to make sure we talk to the chair and make sure that's appropriate.
Okay.
It probably is, but I just want to make sure so we don't.
You mean
get
Andre?
ourselves in? Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
No,
so
me. We're gonna have a faux conversation. I'm kidding. Okay. Yes. Breakout room. Good.
Okay, so I'm gonna hit the button here. That's probably gonna move for the 4 of us, and then everyone else can just leave. So thank you all very much.
Right? I think they wanted without you. So you could just go in and then leave the room and then go back in because they need to deliberate.
Yeah, before I hit the button, I just want to say thank you to everyone, just in case it boots.
Yeah.
All right, thanks everyone.
Later.
Oh, they are in the breakout room and I am not. All right, thank you everyone who was watching on YouTube.